Hello, and welcome to Dave's American Flyer Trains. I'm going to take a diversion from the current video series. We have having just finished up part 2, which is the Union Pacific Freight Train, and talk about something that some of you may have already noticed on the elevated section of my layout. But before visiting the layout to show the application of these, I want to talk a little bit about their branded name and their nomenclature. First, their name. I think that these are 3R Plastics S-gauge rubber roadbed ties. Now, my impression or perception is that 3R Plastics made plastic railroad ties similar to these, and maybe even in a variety of thickness. Now, that may have been due to gauge, or maybe it was due to the rail that it was supposed to go on. But I believe these are 3R Plastics S-gauge rubber railroad ties. I've also seen Moondog, maybe they were just a distributor, mentioned with these types of ties. Now, my impression is that there's 3R because if you look in the center underneath of any of the ties, there is an R stamp that came as part of the, I'm assuming, molding process, and a triangle, hence 3R. These ties are pliable, they're washable, which I did. They're definitely S-gauge. The S-gauge rails fit exactly between these flanges that you see, and the height is perfect for the standard section of rail from Gilbert American Flyer. They are practically the same dimension as the sheet metal ties, and they fit perfectly underneath, as you can see. Now, in some of these where the flanges are still in good shape, you can literally snap them on. I don't think that's a good long-term solution. If you're using the rail at grade like this and maybe on top of an indoor-outdoor carpet, I think they would stay in place. But other places, they may require a little bit of bonding, and I'll talk about that even more when I talk about the elevated section. I may even have one of these snapped on. Yes, there's one that I snapped on. Now here I chose, just for display purposes and introductory purposes, that 3 ties look very nice when between 2 of the standard sheet metal ties from Gilbert Track. And by the way, they fit nicely on curved sections as well. Obviously they won't fit as good between the flanges, but I'll show you how I used them. I actually used them 2 per section in order to stretch them out a bit. So I think they even still look a little bit prototypical like that. But I think the 3 made it look, bumped it up a notch for being prototypical. I was fortunate to come in contact with and be able to obtain a fairly large collection of these, certainly enough to go around my elevated railroad and have some left over, thanks to an idea and the generosity of a fellow collector and a colleague who suggested that I could get a more prototypical look to my elevated railroad if I would find a way to apply these to the railhead. Now let me just demonstrate how I did that. The tools that were used is just a couple of strips of 1/8 inch plywood and a small Irwin grip, locking grip. And what I did was, of course, is I washed these thoroughly. I wanted to get all grease and oil off of them. I even went back and cleaned underneath the rails with a little isopropyl alcohol to hopefully produce some good bonding. Then I chose to use, I knew I had to use something on the elevated railroad to hold these because the little flange clips simply weren't enough to be dependable long term. They'll stay there right now. And if you have it, like I said, if you have it sitting on, say, cork or indoor-outdoor carpet, I think they'll stay in place with those flanges, and they're the exact same height as these sheet metals, so there's no movement in them. You can slide them around. But I needed to find a way to bond them up there. I didn't want the bonding to be so permanent that I couldn't pull these off, or if I did pull them off, it would damage these the ties or leave some sort of residue on the bottom of the rails. So what I came up with was just Elmer's glue. It's a good bonding material. It's water soluble. You can, with a little bit of pressure, pop these off, or some substantial pressure, pop them off, and then they're easily cleaned. The tie is easily cleaned, and so is the rail. So here's what I did. Of course, we're working on an elevated railroad, so I'm going to have to do two things at once. I put, after cleaning the bottom of the rail, a little isopropyl alcohol, washing these, I put a drop of Elmer's glue between each of these flange sets, and then popped it in and just held it for 20 seconds maybe, just to get enough bonding that I could let go of it and go get the next one. Took the next one and did the same thing. I had to be very careful not to knock one off or the other during this process. So I'm going to have to cheat a little bit in order to do this without the bonding. So I get them on there with the glue. I didn't want to bang them. You don't want to bang them around because the glue will hold them under their own weight, but that's about it. You don't want to put any pressure on them. Also, with that Elmer's glue, you have the opportunity to slide them just a little bit to get the right spacing. Then, on the elevated railroad, I held with my hand this 1/8 inch strip of plywood, put another strip on top, like this, and then using the grip, put it on, squeeze tight, and that's good to go. So this is what it looked like during the drying process. I let them dry each section of track 24 hours. Now I worked from one end to the next so that I could do this every day. I could put 4 ties on because I had the strips of wood, I had 2 clamps, certainly had the glue and certainly had the ties, but I had to skip around a little bit, and then when they met up finally, I had to move them over just a little bit and maybe make them look a little bit more like this, or slid them down a little bit more so they were even with the tie, and they could be put on adjacent. So after drying for 24 hours, I simply came back, popped the clamp, and the ties were on pretty permanently, giving it a much more prototypical look. Now let's go over to the layout and look at the end result. When I built the elevated section, I had basically 5 solid places to support the track, and that would have been with the girder bridge, the erector set trestle bridge, 2 truss bridges, one here, one there, flanking the larger trestle bridge. So that had a solid platform. Now when I first constructed this, I just laid the track as we were all instructed to do on top of these elevated sections or extended sections of trestle, high trestle, clamped them, maybe. But I had a long history of sparking and problems in keeping this track clean. Now, I did have solid support down here where the curve is. That is 1/8 inch plywood, and I built the supports and supported it from here around to about here. And that was to support the big trestle bridge and this section of track in here. But again, I was having way too much problems with the sparking, arcing, and the dirtiness of this track. It was just black on a daily basis. I had to clean it. So I called an expert, somebody I really trust, whom I think is one of the leading, most knowledgeable people about Gilbert American flour as anyone, and I consider this person one of, if not the premier restorer of accessories like my talking station and wayside stations, things like that. And I asked him, and he said that you're gonna have to support that track with a solid foundation, and you'll get better performance, and you need to use rubber roadbed even though it's elevated whenever possible. So I had the opportunity to use rubber roadbed right here with the girder section, here with the erector set bridge, here where I had the solid wood platform all the way around to the truss bridge, and then down here where there's that solid wooden platform and the bridges all the way to there. So that was the only places I could put the rubber roadbed. But it made a remarkable difference in the performance of the trains on the elevated section and on the dirtiness of the track, and the sparking practically went away. He also recommended to make sure that all the high rail sections of the supports were in fact clipped to the track to give it more sturdiness, to keep the sections together. So all that being said, a colleague came up with an idea to make this more prototypical. Add these across these ties, and I did that from here all the way around till it meets up with that truss bridge right there, giving it that much more prototypical look, I think, and it worked out really well. These can be used to fill in any gaps in the track where you would like to have ties. We get back on a rubber roadbed here. Now here's where I put a few more ties in when I first started. Wish I hadn't, but it looks okay. Put more ties in here and finish this on out till I got back to the solid platform and the rubber roadbed. Now I didn't really put the ties in for any reason other than cosmetic, to make it have a little bit more of a prototypical look. But I think it's actually further quietened this high rail, this elevated section, and certainly given it a different appearance. But I think the performance of the trains even went up a little, excuse me, a notch with that additional support. One last bit of information about these rubber rubber ties is that, as I mentioned before, they can be used to fill in gaps for whatever reason, where you had to pull something out or couldn't fill it in, or got some sort of attachments like a 696 track trip and you couldn't use a full section or any part of a rubber roadbed. I've never really liked the way the track looks on this connecting platform for the stockyard and the green that comes through. So what I'm going to do is pry this up just a little bit, enough to put those rubber ties in. I might even be so ambitious as to put something black as part of the background, such as maybe some sort of black paper to give it a little bit more blackness. But I'm certainly going to add 2 ties to these sections, one here, and one here, to see if I can't get it to look a little bit more prototypical and a little bit less green, as though it were sitting on grass next to the stockyard. Thanks again for watching Dave's American Flyer Trains. So long, everyone.